there's simple things we can do this Christmas season. When people are more spiritually open, I believe, than any time of the year, this is an opportunity to do something simple. Why not invite someone to come to Christmas services at your church? You know, do you know on an average Sunday in America, there are 18 million Americans who say, I would have gladly gone to church today if a friend had invited me.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pastor to Pastor. I'm your host, Dave Stone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Make sure that you subscribe to Pastor wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Pastor to Pastor Podcast. And on YouTube, you can follow us at the Focused Pastor channel. And hey, if this conversation blesses you, which I promise you it will, please share it. Pass it on, share it with another pastor or ministry leader who is involved in your life. And maybe it's a close friend, maybe it's a confidant, perhaps it's someone that just you love to talk ministry and church things with. Well, today we have our first ever return guest on Pastor to Pastor. He's a man I'm sure all of you know quite well. His book and movie, The Case for Christ, has led thousands of people to faith. But he didn't stop there. Lee Strobel is an amazing evangelist, teacher, and the author of over 40 books. Today we're talking about a book that he recently re-released. He actually redid it. It's titled The Case for Christmas, which breaks down the validity of the Christmas story, as well as we'll talk about his brand new movie, The Case for Miracles, which chronicles several real-life acts of God that are sure to strengthen your faith. It comes out in the middle of December. Can't wait to tell you more about that. Every time we have a conversation with Lee Strobel, it is chock full of incredible insights, wisdom, and encouragement for Christian leaders. And in this conversation in particular, you're going to hear a couple of stories that I promise that will touch your heart and move you to tears. And make certain that you stick around, because at the end of each episode, I always share with you an illustration or a story that you can use in your ministry. And in this particular case, it will be one that you can use sometime in the month of December. It's a Christmas story, and I know we're always looking for something new that we can use that maybe we haven't used before. But before we get to that story, let's listen in on this conversation with my friend Lee Strobel. Lee, you are so kind to you. I don't know if you realize this, my friend. You are our first second-time guest that we have ever had on Pastor to Pastor with Dave Stone.
Come on.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm honored.
I'm telling you, but you did such a great job last time.
Well,
and there's so many different facets that we can pick your brain on. And this is the perfect time of year. Here we are in December.
Yeah.
And there's so much going on. You've got this book, The Case for Christmas, that is basically a total rewrite and update from a project that you did over 20 years ago.
Right.
But I asked you if you kept that captivating and clarifying story about the Delgados in, because that was a big part of it. Also as part of your journey to faith, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I was a new reporter at the Chicago Tribune in 1974, and I was assigned to write a 30-part series on destitute families in Chicago. So, and to profile a family every day. So the first one I did was a Delgado family. It was a woman named Perfecta Delgado. She was 60 years old. She had severe arthritis. She couldn't work. She was raising two grandchildren, an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. And they were the most destitute family I think I encountered in my investigation. They lived in a hovel. There was nothing in there. Nothing. They didn't have a picture on the wall, a carpet on the floor, an appliance, no food, nothing in their place.
Did you go to each place to interview these people?
I did.
And they were your very first ones?
Yep. And they were so poor that the two girls, who were 13-year-old and 11-year-old, each had one short sleeve dress to wear. That's all they had. And between them, they had one long sleeve, but very light gray sweater. And so they would go off to school in the morning, and this is Chicago in November, it's cold. And they had to walk like half a mile to school. And the one sister would wear the sweater halfway while her sister would shiver next to her. And then she'd take the sweater off and give it to her sister, and then she'd shiver the rest of the way to school. So they had nothing. And yet there was no sense of victimization or sorrow in their home. There was something else. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a sense of optimism. There was a sense of love, and they were so friendly and so embracing of me as a stranger. And so I wrote the article. It appeared on Thanksgiving Day in the Chicago Tribune. And then New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve came, and I'm working at the Tribune. There's no news going on. And I thought, I'm going to drive over to the apartment and see the Delgados. Oh. So I drive over there. One of the granddaughters opens the door, and it looks like Macy's in their place. I mean, people had showered them with everything, and the appliances, refrigerator stocked with food overflowing in the kitchen. They had rugs on the floor. They had a Christmas tree with unopened gifts underneath it. They had clothing. They opened the closet, and it was just chock full of coats and dresses and all kinds, scarves and mittens, and so it was unbelievable. But here was the shocking thing. What I interrupted was them boxing up much of this newfound wealth to give it away. And I said, what are you doing? And through a translator, Perfecta said to me, she said, well, we cannot have plenty while our neighbors have nothing. This is what Jesus would want us to do. And I'm thinking, if this were me, I'd be selling it, extra stuff, I'd be cashing in. And then I said, well, do you appreciate the fact that the readers of the Tribune showered you with all this stuff? She said, oh, this is wonderful. This was not expected. This is a gift from God. But she said, that is not God's greatest gift. She said, no. We celebrate that great gift tomorrow. That is Jesus. And it hit me that here I had everything I needed materially. I was successful at my job. I was, had money. I had everything I needed materially, but my heart was as barren as their apartment had been before I did the article.
You're investigating. Have you started your spiritual search at this stage?
Yeah, it was a real spark because they had everything despite having nothing. They had plenty despite their poverty, and they had the love of God in their life, and they felt like he never abandoned them. He was always there, and they trusted him, and they saw him, and it was such a attraction to me as this hard-hearted atheist that I'm missing something here. There's more to the Christmas season than going to Christmas parties and getting drunk. There is something else. And it planted a seed in me that day that ended up coming to fruition years later after I investigated the evidence for Jesus and became a Christian on November the 8th of 1981.
Do you know if they ever found out that you became a Christ follower?
That's so funny you ask that, because I tried to find them. Years later, after I became a Christian, I tried to find them. I could not find them. And I often wondered, might they have been angels? I don't know. But I cannot find them. I would love to have, I'm sure Perfecta is long past, but the grandchildren are probably still around. And I'd love to tell them about how their love of God and that Christmas Eve influenced me many years later in coming to faith.
I love how God works upstream, because who would have ever thought? See, I get choked up just every time I think of a story like this, because in your mind, when you're going to do that story, you're going to do your job. Yeah. And you had no idea. And God's up there with the angels saying, oh, this is going to be a first step. Yeah. Perfect is going to plant a seed in Lee's life, and it's going to cause him to be more curious. And he's going to go home and he's going to tell his wife and say, you know what? They had absolutely nothing. They had nothing. Yeah. And yet they had joy. How could that be? Yes. So it ties in so well with so many of your books that you've written on evangelism and apologetics, and just how it is that God can use something just to get that snowball rolling and for our hearts to be receptive. So praise the Lord for Perfecta Delgado.
It's an encouragement to all of us, because, sometimes I think, we have to picture ourselves as being Billy Graham or something great we could never be, or something weird like a guy on a street corner with a bullhorn trying to share the gospel. And no, look at what she did. They just were living their life, and God used them in my life. And there's simple things we can do this Christmas season. When people are more spiritually open, I believe, than any time of the year, this is an opportunity to do something simple. Why not invite someone to come to Christmas services at your church? Do you know on an average Sunday in America, there are 18 million Americans who say, I would have gladly gone to church today if a friend had invited me. And yet they sit at home. Not going. So why not take that risk and invite someone to come? Or, this little book, The Case for Christmas, that I wrote that, you get it for a couple of bucks online, a discount. And I wrote it, make it inexpensive so people could give it away to people they encounter. I just got back last night from a trip to Oregon where I spoke at a men's event. I gave away 6 copies of the book on that trip. I gave away 2 copies to servers at the restaurant at the airport, and then to the clerk at the hotel where I was staying. And then who else? Oh, on the way back, I gave away some in the restaurant at the airport when we flew back and so forth. So it's just an easy thing to say, hey, here's a little Christmas gift. And the gospel is in it. The Delgado family story is in it. But then it looks at what is the evidence that we can trust the gospels when it tells us about the birth of Jesus.
And like you said, in December, people are open to that. As Exhibit A, Lee Strobel, as an atheist, at Christmas time is thinking about that family, and you just went back to check on them. That's a perfect example of how in the month of December, we're more prone to maybe think altruistically, or to realize, I could finish something that I've started, or I'll check on this person, or I'll pass this along. And you wrote the book. You made it simple. It is thin. It's easy, which to me, I love an easy read. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So I need something like that. And it's simple to pass that on to somebody who won't be threatened by the size of it. So,
and you know what? Everybody on this trip that I gave it to, and this is right after Halloween. So it's, when I did this, so it's barely into Christmas season. They were all so grateful. 2 of them said, oh, wow, look at this. They said, I'm a reader. I can't wait to read this. And everybody I gave it to, those 6 people, were just like, oh, wow, this looks great. I'm really interested in this. So,
and don't you sell it in multiple copies where you can?
Yeah, that's right. You can get
10 copies or 20.
Yep. You can get a 5-pack where they're $3 each. So there are ways that you can get it inexpensively. And a lot of churches will give it away to visitors on Christmas. Say, hey, if you're visiting with us today, here's a free gift.
You're incredibly generous on things like that. But you're just trying to get this in the hands of people.
Yes.
Very wise, my friend, that you did not, you don't sell them to churches in 6-packs, but it's 10 packs. And so good job on the marketing there. Now, when I think back to the different things I've heard you talk on, and now in this book, The Case for Christmas, it is just this total rewrite and update, and it's right where we're living right now in 25, 26. You've stumbled across, or you talk about some of the different cultural understandings that maybe we have a little bit wrong. And so I'd love to hear some of the things that stand out to you. It doesn't shake our faith. It just might give us a talking point or a teaching point when we're sharing the Christmas story with our grandkids or with our children.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. One of them is how we ended up celebrating Christmas on December the 25th. How did that? Because the Bible doesn't tell us the day that Jesus was born.
I have no idea. I'd love to know your thoughts on how did that come about. Well,
there's some new thinking on this. It actually comes from a professor at Yale Divinity School that I've been able to document and makes total sense in explaining it. And here's the way they did it. He said in early Christianity, they didn't care about birthdays. They didn't celebrate birthdays. It wasn't a big deal. In fact, they used to make fun of the Romans because the Romans would celebrate birthdays, and Christians are saying, why are you celebrating a birthday? What they would celebrate was dates of martyrdom. So if someone died for their faith, that day was remembered. So nobody paid attention to Jesus' birth. Nobody cared back then. So in about the year 200, Tertullian, who was an early Christian leader, said, I'm going to figure out when Jesus was born. And so back then, there was a strong connection between creation and redemption. And the earliest Christians believed that Jesus would have died on the same date that he had been conceived, same day of the year, because of the strong connection between creation and redemption. And so Tertullian calculated, when did Jesus die? And using the Roman calendar of the day, he concluded that Jesus died on March the 25th. Well, if Jesus died on March the 25th, he said, therefore, he must have been conceived on March the 25th. Well, if that's true, just go 9 months later, and that's December the 25th.
Interesting.
In very early Christianity, I think around the year 200, there was a Christian historian named Sextus Julius Africanus. And he actually, in his writings, he says that Jesus was conceived on March the 25th. Well, how would he know? Because Tertullian said, he died on the 25th of March. Therefore, he must have been conceived on that day. Therefore, Christmas would have been on December the 25th. So isn't that interesting?
I've never heard that. And, and it does make sense when you think it through that way.
Yeah. The other thing that's fascinating, I learned, is the question of the popular telling of the story of Christmas, which is that Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem because of the census, to be registered for the census. And they come into town, and Mary's on the verge of giving birth, and they go to a lodge, an inn, and the mean old innkeeper says, sorry, no room at the inn. And
slams the door.
Yeah, so they close the door, and they go off, and she gives birth in a stable or in a cave. And then the newborn Jesus is placed in a manger, in the fresh hay of a manger among the animals. Well, all of that depends on one Greek word. And the Greek word is katalima. And it matters, how is that word best translated? Some have translated as an inn, that there was no room for them in the katalima, in the inn, and therefore they gave birth elsewhere. But current thinking that's probably not the best translation of that word. In fact, you can go back to the year 1395, and John Wycliffe did not translate it as an inn. He translated it as guest room. And in fact, today, the NIV translates it as guest room. There's no inn in the gospel accounts in the NIV. It's the guest room. So here's the story. In the first century in Bethlehem, houses of Jewish people were generally one large room divided into two parts. The larger area was the living area. That's where they would eat and sleep and so forth. And then there was a couple of stairs down into a side area. This is where they would bring the animals at night, because the animals were like pets to them. You had a couple goats, a couple sheep. Yeah. And they would bring them at night into this narrow area. The floor was slanted to the outside for easy cleaning. And they bring the animals in there at night. Well, sometimes the animals, which were often like pets to them, they would come up the couple of stairs into the living area. And so they had mangers up there and also in the animal area. Well, some of the richer families had what was called a guest room, a katalima, a guest room. And it had a separate entrance. And so they had a more lavish house than the average person. So I think, and a lot of scholars today say, the best translation is that there was no room for Mary and Joseph and the katalima, the guest room. So they came to the home of relatives of David, like Joseph was, and there was no room in the guest room. So they had to give birth in the living area. And by the way, the animals may have come up the steps and been part of this, since they were like pets. And there is a manger there where they would place the newborn Jesus. So, and besides which, Luke knew the Greek word to use if he meant to call this an inn. Pandoheion is the word he used from the Greek when he told the story of the Good Samaritan who went into the lodge, to the inn. Well, he didn't use that word in describing this. He used katalima, which was probably a guest room in a house.
Dude, you're changing a lot of Christmas
I
pageants
know,
for a lot of
but we
kids.
want
I
to
mean,
be. You
I
want
think
to
I
be
was an
accurate.
innkeeper. I think I was an innkeeper in like third grade, and it was so easy because I only had one line.
Yeah.
No, there is no room. You know?
And you know what? The other thing, historians say that it would have been socially virtually impossible in the first century in Bethlehem if there was an inn there. There may not have been because Bethlehem was a small town. It wasn't on a crossroads. But if there
Right.
was an inn there, a innkeeper would never turn away a pregnant Jewish woman. That he would be ostracized from the community. He would be blacklisted from the community. You could not do that in the first century.
Hospitality was a big part of their culture, wasn't it?
Exactly, especially for a pregnant. And besides which, it's unlikely, or we don't know whether Mary was on the verge of giving birth when they arrived there anyway. Because if you read carefully the gospel accounts, it says that Jesus was born while they were in Bethlehem. Doesn't say while they're in there 10 minutes or 10 days or 2 weeks. So in fact, the idea that she was on the verge of giving birth comes from a late, a second century account called the Proto-Evangelism of James, which has no connection to history. It's kind of a book of fiction that was written in about the year 200. And in that story, they got within 3 miles of Bethlehem, and she had to give birth. So they found a cave, and she gave birth in a cave. And that's where the popular idea of maybe a cave that she gave birth in, that comes from this book of fiction that was written long after the actual historical events. So
this
we
is
don't
fascinating.
know if she was on the verge of giving birth or not. She may have had it 2 weeks later. We don't know.
I think about pastors. If you're listening to this in real time as we drop it in early December, I love to point things like this out because it gets people thinking, gets people talking about the next time they're at a Christmas party together and there's a trivia question, there's questions, there's comments that you can make, and it gets people leaning in. And just like you've said, in some of your apologetics books, how you'd say, how can a person say that, Jesus died at 3:00 on a Friday, and how can they be so specific on all this? Then you start examining the evidence, and there's reasons for these things.
Yes.
But you bring up great points. The size of Bethlehem, would they have even had an inn? And they're not going to risk ostracism by turning away a pregnant woman or a bad Yelp review. That would really look bad.
Yeah.
I was 9 months pregnant, and they turned me away, and I had the Messiah. I was giving birth to the Messiah, and that didn't even faze them. They still wouldn't give me room. So, let's think for just a second about how it is that in this month people have this openness to the gospel, and there is this miracle piece of God with us, of Emmanuel, where all of a sudden God leaves heaven and comes to earth to be with us. What would you say to Christian leaders as they have a captive audience this Christmas season, whether it's because of special music that takes place, some different things that you do in church world, maybe it's a student ministry program and an outreach, all sorts of different times where people lean in more so in December and at Easter time than any other time. What would you say to Christian leaders if you could talk to them right here having coffee with them? What would you say?
I would encourage the congregation to be praying for friends and neighbors and colleagues at work who don't know Jesus. It's interesting. Jesus' prayers for spiritually lost people continued right up until his final gasps on the cross. That when you read the account of the crucifixion in the original Greek, the imperfect tense of the Greek suggests he didn't just say it once. He kept repeating it, maybe all through the torture of the crucifixion. Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. And if Jesus can pray for lost people up until the moment of his death on the cross, we can certainly pray for people in our lives who don't know Christ. And so I would just encourage people, ask God to bring someone to our minds, someone maybe we've forgotten that we used to pray for, but we've kind of given up on. I met a guy recently who prayed for his lost brother for 48 years and 348 days. 48 years, and he came to faith at the end of his life. So I would get your congregation praying, who might God put on their heart to reach out to during this season. And some of the easiest things to do is to invite someone to come with them on your Christmas Eve or Christmas Day services, whatever you have. And not just to invite them to come, but to pick them up and bring them. Because the odds are going to actually go up substantially if you say, hey, I'll pick you up for the 9 o'clock service. I'll pick you up at 8:30. Well, then they're probably going to come. But if you just say, I'll see you there, then often they don't show up. So I'd say pick them up, bring them with you, and give them a copy of the case. I'm not trying to sell this thing, but the reason I wrote it, and it's so inexpensive, is give them something to put it in their hand. The gospel is in there. And so my hope is that God will use that to kind of whet the appetite for people for the Christmas Eve services that we're going to have at the churches around the country and around the world. It's just a great spiritual opportunity this season. So let's seize it. I did a book called The Case for Heaven a number of years ago. And when I'm writing that book, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to interview someone who's about to go to heaven? And so I went out to Portland, Oregon, and I spent the day with one of my heroes, one of the greatest evangelists of history, Luis Palau.
Yeah.
Luis Palau, through his festivals that he held around the world, through his books and radio show, he shared the gospel with 1 billion people during his lifetime. And here he was on his deathbed. He was dying of cancer. And I wanted to spend one more day with him. And so we had a great conversation. I ended up writing a chapter about it in the book. But at the end of that conversation, he looked at me and he said something that changed my life. And I would encourage you to use this to tell people in your congregation. He looked up and he said, Lee, when you get to the end of your life and all is said and done, you will never regret being courageous for Christ. Mm-hmm. And, being courageous for Christ can be as simple as saying, hey, our family's going to Christmas Eve services this year. How about if you join us? We can have dinner beforehand and then go to the service together. I mean, that step of courage, who knows what spiritual fruit a simple step like that could take? Because when we get on our deathbed and we look back on our life, we're going to see those crossroads where we could have taken the safe route and kept our mouth shut, or we could take the spiritual route and say a quick silent prayer and take a deep breath and invite someone to church or give them a Christian book or take them to a Christian movie or whatever. Take that step of courage and you're going to see how God is going to honor that. And you get to the end of your life, you're going to look back and say, I'm so glad I extended that simple invitation on Christmas Eve, because look how it changed the life of that one family in our community.
Yeah, I love that line. You will never regret being courageous for Christ. Yeah. And even after you've made that invitation and looking back later, you're going to say that really wasn't that courageous in that moment. In that moment, it felt like, gosh, I'm really risking here. I'm risking ridicule. I'm risking, a friend being turned off or whatever it might be. But it's the most loving thing you can do if you really believe. If Jesus only mentioned hell one time in the Bible, we would have to believe that there was a place called hell. Yeah. But the Bible talks about it 54 different times. Yeah. And Jesus went to incredible lengths so that you and I would never have to see a place called hell. Yeah. And he hangs in front of, on a cross before the entrance to hell. And he says, the only way you're going in there is over my dead body. Yeah. And we have these opportunities where we can just say a good word on behalf of Jesus. And you were talking about somebody who prayed for all those decades. We just had someone come to faith who our family has prayed for 20 years. Wow. And to get to be a part of that baptism and just to see that joy and to see him on fire for the Lord. Yeah. So it's awesome. Take the risk, take the chance, and prayer paves the way. What was it? One time I think I heard you say, Dieter Zander said, we ought to talk to God about people before we talk to people about God.
Yes, exactly. Talk to God first about people and then talk to them about God.
Yeah. Let him till that soil. Well, I want to change gears. We have so much that we can talk to you about when it comes to the case for Christmas. But part of why I approached you about joining us on the show again is because of a movie project that you have that is coming out. And it's in these next few days,
Yes.
December 15th through the 18th. And I am so excited about this because I think people are right now wondering about miracles. They ask questions about the validity of things. Yeah. The supernatural is intriguing to people.
And Christmas is a miracle.
I was going to say, it goes right back to I don't want to say the very first miracle, but it's God leaving heaven and coming to earth. It's the big one. Incarnation. Yeah, that's pretty big. I'm going to shut up. Tell me about the movie, The Case for Miracles. I can't wait to see it. The trailer or teaser is incredible, and I can't wait to take some people with me to see it.
Well, that's my hope, that Christians will use it as an outreach tool, that churches will either rent theaters to show, you can rent a showing, or just encourage their folks to get 2 tickets, one for them, one for a friend, extend that invitation. It's a movie about the fact that God is still in the miracle business today. And we deal with cases that have been, in many of the instances, documented by medical researchers and published in peer-reviewed medical journals. So these are not just cases you read about on the internet, but these are well-documented cases that we talk about. And the storyline is, there's a good friend of mine named Manny Sandoval. Manny's father and his and mother immigrated from Guatemala years ago into South Central LA, where his father became a Christian and a pastor. And for years was a faithful pastor of a little church in the poorest area of Los Angeles, South Central LA. Manny and his brother Gilbert went out to Phoenix, Arizona after they grew up and started a company and started making movies. They were involved with PureFlix, which was a movie maker, and then they started doing it on their own. So in the film, my buddy Manny and I are on a car trip on Route 66 in a 1967 vintage Ford Bronco, which is a terrible car, by the way. Oh my gosh. And so we're driving through the scenery, the cinematography is breathtaking as we drive through the desert and mountains of the Southwest. And we talk about miracles because he grew up in a Pentecostal family. His father saw miracles happening in his little congregation in South Central LA. I grew up as a skeptic, as an atheist. And so we have this discussion about miracles. And as we discuss them, then we flash to the actual miracle itself, and you'll see it either reenacted. Often you'll see the actual person who underwent the miracle being interviewed. And so you see these actual cases played out. We deal with the question of, why doesn't God always do a miracle? So we get in some heavy stuff, but the car trip kind of keeps it lighter and more Christmassy and so forth. We ended up it was funny. We filmed the last scene, which was in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I'm standing on a street corner saying goodbye to Manny after this trip. And we rigged it so it would snow. And we filmed it in the summer. So there were some people watching from a bar across the street. And we rigged it so that in this last scene, snow comes down, and these people are freaking out in this bar across the street.
Oh, that's great! Thinking they'd been overserved.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's a great seasonal topic because this is a miracle, and we delve into the miraculous. I wrote a book on the case for miracles years ago, and it draws heavily from that. So I just hope, as an evangelist, I hope churches seize the opportunity and use it as a tool.
So there's 2 things that pop in my mind just as you're talking about this. One is for the person who maybe struggles to share their faith. Well, this gives them an outlet to say, a simple movie invitation. Say, I've read a number of this guy's books. He always gives you things to think about. And I've always been intrigued by supernatural events. And is God still evident today, or was it just back in Bible times? And, it really makes for a very easy invitation to a theater. And it's so non-threatening when you both are facing a screen and it's not face-to-face, confrontation or conversation.
I hadn't thought of that. That's a very good point.
Oh, it's a comfortable setting. You're leaning back, you're chowing down on some popcorn and junior mints. So so that's the first thing that pops in my mind is that for the people in your congregation who struggle to have spiritual conversations, let Lee set the table for you. And then the conversation will come on your ride home or going to get something to eat afterwards.
Yeah.
The second piece that I think is important is that whenever a Christian sees things like this and sees a movie like this, it bolsters my faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really does, Lee, because I'm like I said, I'm not that sharp and I'm not that smart. And so the fact that there are things that are documented, that there are things that there's no explanation for. It's like you and I have talked about before when it comes to sharing your testimony. No one can deny your testimony. Yeah. That's what's happened to you.
Yeah.
And what you've done is you have validated these stories and you've checked them out and vetted them. And the only explanation for them is that there is a God who has intervened.
Yes. Can I tell you one of the stories from the movie? It's so encouraging to me. It's my favorite miracle story that I investigated.
And there's like a half a dozen different stories that you go through and flash back to.
That's right.
Tell me one of them. I am all ears.
This is the story of Barbara. Barbara Snyder is her name, her married name, actually, later years. Barbara Comiskey was her maiden name. But Barbara was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when she was in high school. Mayo Clinic documented, and she deteriorated very quickly. Multiple hospitalizations, multiple surgeries. And it got to the point where they said, we're just going to let her die next time she gets pneumonia because we're just prolonging the inevitable. One doctor said she is the most hopeless patient I've ever seen. So she's in hospice. She's several years. She's deteriorated. She's in hospice and at her home, and she's curled up like a pretzel. Her fingertips are touching her wrists. Her feet are rigidly extended. She's one lung is collapsed. The other lung is at 50%. She's lost control of her urination and bowels. She has a tube inserted in her throat connected to oxygen canisters in the garage so she could breathe. She's lost her eyesight. All she can see is gray shapes. And her legs had atrophied. She hadn't walked in 7 years by that time. So her legs had lost her muscle tone. So she's curled up, she's dying. And some friends said, well, we should get some people praying for her. So they called up WMBI, which is the radio station in Chicago, the Moody Bible Institute, and said, would you ask your listeners to pray for poor Barbara? She's curled like a pretzel. She's dying. So we documented that over 450 people began praying for Barbara because we know that because they wrote letters to Barbara saying, I'm praying for you. So here it is on Pentecost Sunday. She has two friends with her in her room. She's curled up under the covers. They're reading her some of these letters they've received from people who are praying for her to encourage her. And all of a sudden, Barbara, from the corner of the room where nobody was, she hears the voice of God saying, my child, get up and walk. And it stuns her. So she rips out the tube so she can talk. And she says, I don't know what you're going to think of this, but God just told me to get up and walk. You need to go find my parents. I want them to be here. So they run out of the room, but Barbara couldn't wait. So I actually interviewed Barbara, and Barbara said, I jumped out of bed. And I said, Barbara, what's the first thing you noticed? She said, the first thing I noticed, my feet were flat on the floor. My feet had been rigidly extended for years. They were fat. Yeah. The second thing I noticed, my hands came uncurled and were natural again. And then she said, the third thing I noticed, I could see again. She said, you think that'd be the first thing I noticed? That was the third thing I noticed. My eyesight was back. She was instantaneously 100% healed of multiple sclerosis. Her lungs reinflated. Her mother came running into the room and fell to her knees and grabbed Barbara's calves and said, your muscle tone is back. Her muscle tone had instantly returned. Her father came in and was waltzing with her around the room. So they said,
Lee,
we got to go thank God for this. It was Pentecost Sunday. They went to a Wesleyan church in Wheaton, Illinois. And they said, let's go to church and thank God. So they get in the car, they drive there, they arrive, the service has already started. They're in the back waiting to come in. And the pastor gets up and says, does anybody have any announcements? And Barbara is walking down the center aisle, and the entire place erupts with people singing, Amazing Grace, I once was blind and now I see. The next day, she goes to one of her doctors to be examined. And the doctor said later, I saw her walking down the hallway toward my office. My first thought was, oh, she died, and that's a ghost. Because he said, this is medically impossible. 100% totally healed. Barbara, it actually made the secular newspapers the next day. Chicago Tribune carried an article about it. It was headlined, Get Up My Child and Walk.
Really?
It was so. Barbara ended up marrying a pastor, a Wesleyan pastor. They had a little church in Fredericksburg, Virginia, spreading the news of Jesus the rest of their lives. And so I love the story of Barbara. She was the sweetest woman. When I interviewed her for my book, The Case for Miracles, originally, I pay people when I interview them because I'm taking their time, and often they're scholars, and I'm taking their expertise and using it in the book. So I compensate people. So I tried to give Barbara a thank you check to thank you for the interview. She said, no, I can't accept anything. No, God did this in my life. I could never accept anything for that. It's nothing I did. And she's just the sweetest woman. That's just one story you'll see in the film. And I believe you'll actually see the actual interview I did where she talks about jumping out of bed and the look in her eyes. This happened in the mid 1980s. And yet,
and you think about the atrophy of 7 years.
Yes.
And I can picture, we've all seen, so many Christian leaders have been in hospital calls right and left, or you've taken your youth group to see people in a nursing home or whatever, and you see that curling, curling of the hands or the curling of the feet just in that bed. And for her feet to be flat on the ground.
Yes.
I mean, it's miracle after miracle. So there's people who'll be listening to this, and I'm you were an atheist. Manny Sandoval was Pentecostal.
Right.
I grew up in the middle, and by that I mean I was a Christian, but since some of these supernatural things, I'm not sure how to explain that. I don't have a drawer for that. I don't have a box to put that in, and so we just kind of put it off to the side. But if we really believe Ephesians 3:20, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. If the same power that lives inside of us is the same power that raised Jesus from the dead, we have to say, okay, Lord, you are still active and you're doing some incredible things. What would you say to the Christian leader who listens to this or sees this movie and they want to be open to God's power, but they also don't want to fall into sensationalism or what do you say to that person?
Because we can see it in the film. There are people who make up stories about healings. There are people who, there's a placebo effect where people who think they're going to feel better suddenly feel better. There are fraudulent things that take place. So there's a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's a misdiagnosis. Oh, you were cured of cancer. No, you didn't really have it in the first place. That was a misdiagnosis. That happens. We got to concede that. But there are these cases. Again, they're not just things we hear on the internet. We have a case in the movie of a woman who was blind for 12 years. She went to a school for the blind. She learned to read Braille. She walked with a white cane, and she married a Baptist pastor. And one night they're getting ready to go to bed, and she's in bed already. Her husband comes up and puts his hand on her shoulder and begins to cry and begins to pray. And he says, Lord, I know you can heal my wife. I know you can do it. And Lord, I pray you do it tonight. And with that, she opened her eyes to perfect eyesight. She said, after years of being blind, after years of darkness, I opened my eyes and in her words, I could see perfectly. She saw her husband for the first time. She said, it's a miracle. How else do I explain this? This case, her vision remained for 50 years, the next 50 years, and she recently passed away, but her vision remained for the last 50 years of her life. It was documented by 4 medical researchers and published in a peer-reviewed medical journal. This is not hearsay. This is documented stuff. And I know there's
Yeah.
pastors that get a little squirrely about miracles today. Do they still occur? I find a lot of cessationists still leave room in their theology that God might still do miracles today. Where their problem becomes is, do people still have a gift of healing today? That's another issue. And I don't get into that. But is God still active today? A lot of people are cessationists, still believe that God does miracles today. So what do you do with something like that? How do you explain the voice from the corner of the room for Barbara? How do you explain this woman opening her eyes right after a prayer for her healing to as she describes, a perfect eyesight that remains then? So I think this to me deepens my faith. It encourages me. God is still in the miracle business today. Now,
Amen.
Why doesn't he heal my wife? My wife has a neuromuscular condition. She's been in pain for 20 years. She will be in pain every day for the rest of her life unless God does a miracle. It's an incurable condition. We have prayed for a miracle. It has not happened. What about that? Well, we deal with that in the movie and in the book, The Case for Miracles. I think there's ways we can look at that are important for us to understand. But I think to say, Christmas is a miracle. Christmas season, more people are open. Here's an opportunity to make an easy invite, to invite someone to be exposed to the evidence in a creative way. Wait till you see the cinematography of this movie. It'll blow your mind. So it's a beautiful film. And to have, as you say, that discussion on the car home or in a meal afterward to say, what do you think of that? And by the way, Christmas is coming up. Why don't you come with us it's an easy invite at that point.
Well, it could be a 1-2 punch. And,
yes.
Thank you for these resources. And, I'm the skeptic who, when you start to share these stories, I want to know, okay, is this really true? Well, with the gal that you just told us about,
right,
who was blind,
yes,
and her husband praying.
Yes.
I mean, you didn't have to vet or validate that one very much. You had me when you said she learned Braille.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
if you go to the trouble of learning Braille,
right.
it's probably not because you're setting up a fake miracle, right, in the future. It's because that's the only way you're going to be able to communicate and be able to read and learn. But the movie comes out December 15th through the 18th. That's a Monday through a Thursday.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening to this and we just dropped this episode, let me encourage you, get a group from your church. Like Lee mentioned, he said, hey, rent out a theater. This is an opportunity for you to use this as an outreach tool and also to bolster the faith of the Christian community. So what a great opportunity for you to get your small group together. Lee, when there's a Christian movie that comes out, oftentimes our Wednesday night group of 30 people will say, hey, we're going to go support this movie and we're going to go watch it. And if you want to bring a friend with you, bring a friend with you. And so it's a great way for you just to kind of take over a small theater.
Yeah.
And it gives you this opportunity to invite somebody who's maybe on the fringe or who's gone through a rough time. Or, I mean, Thanksgiving to Christmas, the suicide rate increases. Yeah. It's a painful time. It's a hard time for a lot of people. And there are a lot of people who are asking the question, okay, what goes on? Is there hope?
Yeah.
They want answers to life's tough questions.
Yeah.
And I love what you shared because, our spouse isn't always going to be healed from something just because we pray every night and say, Lord, would you take this? But instead it's a trust of saying, okay, Lord, how do you want to be glorified through this?
Yes.
And, if it's your strength is made perfect through my weakness, then I'm going to trust your plan. So, the movie is called The Case for Miracles. The book that we've talked about is called The Case for Christmas. Both of those are really strong. And of course, this is a great opportunity in December for you to take advantage of this. And Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us. And, we love having you as a guest. You're incredibly gracious, but you're also, articulate apologist and advocate for Christ in God's word. And we love you and appreciate you.
Thank you for what you do to reach out to pastors. And you were in that and are in that realm, the church, the church realm, and for you to be able to help other pastors, that's awesome. So, I'm praying for pastors this Christmas season. That's one of my commitments at the top of my prayer list. I'm going to pray for all the pastors that God will give you courage and insight and wisdom and enthusiasm and courage to really make this the time that we can rally our church to reach people with the only message on the planet that can change their lives and change their eternities.
Well, as always, I feel like I'm an investigative journalist after listening to Lee Strobel, because I've taken a myriad of pages of notes. My heart goes out to any of you who also have played the innkeeper at a Christmas pageant, just like I did in third grade. But Lee did leave us with a powerful reminder. It's a time when people are both hurting and more spiritually open. And he shook me to my core when he talked about 18 million Americans would have gone to church if someone invited them last weekend. So pastors, please tell your church this weekend, hey, this is a time when people are spiritually hungry and they're open to invitations. And then when they do come, make certain that the gospel is what it is that they hear. I loved him talking about the new movie, The Case for Miracles. It's going to be out December 15th through the 18th. It's a short stint, so make certain that you take advantage of that. But there's so many different stories, and he talks about Barbara. Imagine that, a woman who is shriveled up on death's door, blind, kept alive by machines. Nothing short of the power of God could have saved her. Do you believe that God can still do incredible things? I do. I believe he's sovereign. I believe he is still moving. And I believe that there's power in prayer. And we need to convey that to our people. I think that one of my favorite parts was the fact that Lee pointed out that his wife, Leslie, who has a neuromuscular disease that she has not been healed of, that God can still be on his throne even when he chooses not to heal a person. And I think that's really important for us to think about. The story that he shared about Perfecta Delgado was nothing short of amazing. That Chicago family, she was kind of the matriarch, the grandmother raising those kids. It is interesting because she had literally nothing. If you look up the meaning of Perfecta Delgado, you'll find that it means perfectly slim or perfectly slender. Think about that meaning of that word. Slender meaning that it is lacking something. And yet what appeared to be to the world a person that was poverty-stricken, who had nothing, Perfecta Delgado would tell you that she had everything because she had Jesus Christ. What a great lesson for all of us. And it also shared with Lee and started him on a faith journey, as that seed was planted of seeing that since they had Jesus, they felt like their lives were complete. And I love the challenge that he gave us from Luis Palau, just talking about that courageous faith. He said, you will never regret being courageous for Christ. So be that spokesperson for Christ this Christmas. Be a walking advertisement and billboard for the Lord Jesus Christ, who truly is the reason for the season. The story that I want to share with you is one that I read several years ago. It's about a young family in Northern California. The husband and wife had gone through some rocky times, and the young wife finally got so disillusioned with the stress of marriage and the responsibility of being a mother that she had just felt like she was at the end of her rope and she had to get away. And one morning, the husband awakened to a note beside him in the bed, and she was gone. He agonized over her leaving, but felt that she needed a little space, and so he didn't try to follow her. He did call her on her cell phone that day and every day. He told her he loved her. He begged her to come home. She listened to what he had to say and could often hear her softly weeping in the background as he would talk, but she stubbornly refused to come home. As Christmas approached, the young father became more intentional. And since she had turned her location off on her phone, he had hired a private investigator to help him locate her. And a week later, the detective stumbled onto her in a low-budget motel in a seedy area of Las Vegas. Without alerting her to his discovery, he called the husband back in California. And on Christmas Eve night, she sat on a lumpy motel bed all by herself in the dimly lit room. She felt about as lonely as she'd ever felt in her entire life. And then she heard a knock at the door. Soft at first, and then it grew louder and more insistent. Slowly, hesitantly, she walked across the room and she pulled back the curtain just enough to be able to look outside. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw her husband standing in the doorway. She slid the chain free. She threw open the door and she fell into his arms. He'd barely gotten the words out. "We love you. We need you. Please come home." He barely got it out, and she was already throwing the few clothes that she had into her old suitcase and headed for his car. A couple of weeks later, the Christmas tree was now back in the attic. The kids were back in school. He asked her, "Why did you wait so long to come home? I begged you to come home dozens of times. What took you so long?" She said, "You told me you loved me. You told me you needed me. But those were just words until you came." 2,000 years ago, the God of the universe came. He left heaven and he came to earth. He set aside his power, and rather than you're just hearing that God loves you, he decided to put it into action by coming to earth. A person doesn't travel that far unless they love you and unless they want to be in a relationship with you. The angel said, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. For unto you is born today in the city of David a Savior. He is Christ the Lord." Well, thank you so much for listening to that conversation with Lee. Thank you for listening to that story. Remember, his book, The Case for Christmas, is very inexpensive. It's a perfect gift to pass out this holiday season. There will be a lot of new people visiting your church this time of year, so give them a copy. Pass it out to people that are in your neighborhood, that maybe you also hand them some chocolate chip cookies. You can find the link to how to get that book below in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening to Pastor. We drop a brand new episode every Tuesday. It's designed to encourage, to inspire, and to challenge you. Leadership can be lonely, and that's why we call this Pastor to Pastor. It's for a reason. It's to remind you you're not alone. So until next time, I'm Dave Stone, saying God bless.